How do you just DM like that?
I've been practicing some good habits as a wizard! I mean a dungeon master.
Hey there, I hope you're having a great day. I am a dungeon master, I am a player, and I am a viewer of actual plays. I also make one. Go check it out. It's on this channel. First link down below. Over the few years that I've played this game and in this hobby, I've learned very important habits. I have learned what is important for dungeon masters, what can make better habits for dungeon masters. And I wanted to share those and talk about those today. Steal ideas from books, movies, video games, and adapt them to your game. It's kind of a fundamental thing that I'm doing on this channel is on my adventures, like Curse of Amity Island, it's primarily based off of Jaws, adapted into a D&D fantasy game in my world. And I'm working on doing The Mummy, Dante's Peak, A Knight's Tale, Godfather, Cocaine Bear. When it comes to world building, I have a bunch of books that have nothing to do with each other except for being part of D&D. And I use these books because a lot of smart, creative people put their passions into sharing stories, cultures, world building aspects for their own thing that you can use not to just play in their world, but to enhance your own world. When it comes to video games, I would be cautious. I really would, because the first thing you might think is Zelda, Skyrim, and the puzzles that they have. Those puzzles are very visual based off controllers, and which is completely different than how tabletop games are run. If you're going to adapt their puzzles, you have to do the extra work to adapt that mechanically as well to a tabletop experience. What kind of dungeon master are you? This is something that I've recently heard a few people bring up, and this is something I had to think about a lot when I started DMing, especially when I had other friends DMing around me in the same table and we would swap places, such as like, I would DM this game, you'll DM that game, you'll DM this game. And we had to actually stop and think about what kind of game is each one's game? What kind of DM are you? What kind of players are we going to be? Because we started getting confused on which game we were because everything was just assumed to be D&D. This is an important thing that you won't know right away, but you start getting a taste of what you like as a DM and what you want to present to players, and then you learn how to adapt to a little bit of what each player wants in your game. How much should you tell your players? Should you keep it to the vest and talk vagueness? Or should you actually just start laying things out very obvious and clear? I got the answer for you because I'm frustrated with both. The idea that players like to roll things, that doesn't mean you put in the game and put the important parts of the game behind rolls. Because then the game will never happen, because the point of rolling dice is to make sure you do fail. It's not to make sure you succeed. I can succeed by asking the right question, to role play the right way. What's 1 + 1? 2. Go ahead and roll an intelligence check to see if 2 is 1 + 1. No, I answered the question. I got it right. The point of the die is to see if you fail. So don't put failure attached to important things. Put failure when it's attached to things that you as a game master aren't sure about, or where the stakes are high. You know, playing Alien RPG, a horror game, one of the most important things I walked away from that game is don't put a roll on something that death is not associated to. Because in that game, a critical failure is basically you're going to die. If opening a door requires a roll, what happens if they fail? Do they die? When you're not sure about something as a game master, keep it vague, have dice attached to it. If you're very sure about something, the players get it right away and ask a direct question, give it to them. They did it. If it's somewhere in the middle, have a dice roll. Maybe with advantage because they are putting the clues together to avoid that critical fail. Take notes. Use a notepad, a tablet, a laptop, whatever is most convenient and functional for you. Things I take notes on are monster hit points, NPC names, treasure. I think treasure. Everything else I kind of have like locked in my brain while I'm playing. If I'm playing more than one game at a time, I'm taking even more notes. Learn how to describe different people and places. Something while editing the actual play, the D&D podcast that I DM in, one of the things I notice is I wish I do more of describing the situation when the battle map comes out. A little bit of the overall surrounding, some of the key structures, creatures like NPCs or monsters that you might be seeing right away, and where the players are starting on the map. In Theater of the Mind, that helps a lot. So I wish I would describe things like that better. Or it doesn't have to be as flavorful as a fantastical book, but describe the color, describe smells, the lighting, like dim, darkness, bright. What's the moisture? These little things that we take for granted that our bodies in real life just do automatically, and we know what that means. Giving a little bit of that to our characters about places and people, like they smell funky. You smell ozone. You smell whatever the smell is that you smell rain for. You smell that around them. That's weird. That's a clue. So practice looking up and maybe even make a list of things that you could smell or see or describe better and put that on your DM screen. I recently got a book, Artifice's Description and Dilemmas. What I really like about this small book is there's a whole chapter on rooms and spaces where they give you a quick little sketchy picture. They give you what the name of the room is, interrogation room, a room used for the purpose of questioning prisoners, suspects, witnesses, and victims. There's probably a chair, a lamp, table, restraints. And on top of that, whole nother chapter is on textures, the type of textures and what they might look like. And that way you can build that reference in your brain quicker and smoother, and then you can repeat that often over and over and over. Make fantastical names for everything because it makes things more rememberable. A faction, a place. And what I like to do is when it comes to remembering a place's name or learning a place's name, I will have very low DC dice rolls attached to it. So that way it's really between 1 and 5, maybe 1 and 3 to be like failure. Oh, you've actually never heard about this, or somebody else talked about it a bunch, but you don't really know much about it. I make it more accessible for players to have known this place or heard of this place, which allows me to share those cool, fantastical names. Another important thing is to hit the like button and subscribe if you want more videos like this. Something that I think was bad advice given out in the internet is have your players recap the games for you because you're making sure that it's important for them to memorize the game. They're not. And every time I see it, the problem becomes they remembered a piece of information, and kind of the point of the advice was to see what they remembered, what they cared about. You end up spending more time filling in the blanks and correcting people's corrections and stuff. As a dungeon master, recap the game. Recap the plot events that have happened. You fought a dragon, you burnt down this camp, and everyone's going, oh yeah, that did happen. And then they will fill in some details that they remember. That's a better way of doing it than having the players go first on the recap. Know what your NPCs want before they go into a scene. And the same thing goes for making sure your players have the same thought process. Know what you want to get from the cleric. The same thing is if you're going to prepare a scene with a bunch of NPCs in a room, know what those NPCs want, or else you're going to bloat that scene and it's going to take up a session. It's not going to be efficient and your players are going to get bored really quick. Might not always be the case, but it's more likely to be the case if you don't just write down what does this group of NPCs want, what does this individual want, even if it's a dirt simple want. For your villains, I recommend writing down 3 to 6 sound bites. If you don't know what a sound bite is, quick verbal thing. You can see them in video games or even movies now. If they get hit, they go, "How dare you? My cousins across the world will find you for doing this." That's a quick sound bite. "How dare you use the power of the sun against me?" Quick soundbite. They are one-liners that happen during combat versus just saying "ah" or or that doesn't add value. It just communicates to players that you're scrambling, that you're going too fast, you're not taking a breath and adding to the story just as much as you're asking them to describe what their attacks look like. You need to describe how your villains and monsters react. What does the villain say in response of taking that damage and that damage type is a great way of thinking about this. How can what they say communicate to the players their resistances, their immunities, their vulnerabilities, their highest stat, and maybe even their lowest stat? What do they say at the top of the first round? What do they say at the top of the second round when they hit halfway on their hit points? And what's the last thing they say when they die? I find that a lot of DMs try to build up their villain in role play. Before the fight, they gotta have their evil monologue. Break up the monologue into sound bites and scatter them in the combat. This is not a game of players listen to DM give a one-man speech. This is a game where players fight monsters. What is something that your villain says when they kill a player? Let your players help build the world. This can come in a lot of different flavors. They can come up with places, right? Someone's your monk, maybe they'll come up with the monasteries for you. Have one of your players burn an entire town down in their backstory because their town got raided. What if another character says they're from that town, but they're much younger? Did the town get rebuilt? Were their parents a survivor from there? That's world building. That question of that. And you can ask your players, hey, can you fill in the details about this? And now they're collaborating on this town's history, and that town matters to them, and they've given you something for that world, and that's now theirs as well. Let them create NPCs. I highly recommend this. Every game I ask, hey, what's a couple NPCs that you know in town? In Curse of Amity Island, one of my players is a town guard. So I had him come up with all the NPCs who would be the town's guard. For a couple other members of the table, they had families in the town. So I had them fill out who their family members were. Have your players build factions, guilds, or at the very least work with them that makes a compatible guild to what makes sense, to what's going on. The biggest thing I have to say is don't plan for solutions. Don't plan for the transition from this encounter to the next. Don't plan how the players are going to get through this. Put a situation in front of them and let the dice roll and the dominoes fall as they will. That's the beauty of this game. There's a feeling of like, well, I want my players to succeed. If that's the case and that's the type of game you want to run, make sure that the situation is less threatening. You know, instead of 20 bandits in the room, put 5. Or put 20 bandits in the room. It's unlikely that they'll go into combat, and you can push the game for a role play situation. And maybe you were thinking, oh, they'll talk through this. They might stab a guy and flee. Be open to these different solutions that the players are responsible for coming up with. Sure, consider a way, but that is not what's going to happen. Your idea of how to solve the problem, its only purpose is to tell you more on the design of the problem. I got 20 bandits in this room. They could easily kill my players. Why don't they? It's because they want to talk. They know that the players would easily fight their way out if they could. So overwhelm them with more bandits to slow them down so you can talk. That doesn't mean that's how it's going to go, but that's what the intent was. Having an intention is different than having a solution. The solution is not your job as the dungeon master. If you like these videos and you want more, consider supporting me on Patreon. Thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you have a great day. Remember, have fun.
Listening to 102.3 where we playeth nothing but chance, and more chance. This are not thine elder matriarch station.